podcast. My name is Pete Flecha, and joining me as always is my good cowboy hat wearing friend, John Nicholson. John, how you doing, buddy?
It feels like Christmas in the summer, because I finally get to talk about all this stuff. And the biggest challenge of like working on these launches, I feel like, is you have all this stuff in your head, and then you're trying to have conversations with normal people that are not under NDA, and you want to be like, oh yeah, that problem, we fixed it. Oh wait, we're about to. And so there's so much goodness here. This is fun.
So it feels like Australia, Christmas and summer, but now you can actually have these conversations.
Yes, Australian Christmas is definitely the summer launch window. There we go.
There you go. I like it. It's a great launch. For those that are listening or watching this, we just released a whole series on VCF 9.1 that John and I filmed when we were in Palo Alto a few weeks ago. So by all means, check that out. We spoke to some of the leadership teams, some of the key product leads and stuff like that. But we definitely wanted to take a slightly deeper dive on various features and components within the vSphere platform, within the VCF platform. So yeah, vSphere being one of those. And this is going to be a great episode, because anytime we have Feidhlim on, we know we can count on the information. Feidhlim, welcome back to the Virtually Speaking podcast.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you, John, for having me back yet again. I think I've been doing this podcast since, I want to say, vSphere 8 days, and every update since. So yeah, happy to be back.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, I know there's a lot of goodness in this one. We've gotten some of the broad strokes already, but I'd love to, and we're going to go even slightly deeper later on. We're going to touch some things like some of the Kubernetes pieces, even some of the security stuff with Bob Plankers. But yeah, I really wanted to touch on a few areas with you. I know you cover a lot of the platform, but let's talk a little bit about like lifecycle management, which is a huge one. I'd love to talk about, there's been a lot of enhancements in performance. So I want to talk about some of those, but also VM management. So before we dive into, say, lifecycle management, maybe you can touch on like, what is your impression of this launch 9.1 that practitioners need to take away?
Yeah, so one thing that I love about these vSphere releases, right, it's a component of the wider VCF stack. And when we talk about the wider VCF stack, we're talking about a lot of these, fantastic features that take advantage of the whole component suite. But what I really like about some of these vSphere releases is there's a lot of small enhancements, but they're really, really great enhancements that will make the lives of the practitioners, the administrators, a lot better. They may not be the features that will be front and center in the marketing collateral, for example, but there's a lot of nice little enhancements and features here that will make the lives of the admins day to day much, much simpler.
I like that. Yeah, I was reading through some of those, and I was like, "Ooh, a little handsome." And I won't spill the beans just yet, but some of them were pretty. Would probably be boring to some folks, but I found pretty exciting. So why don't we just jump in and start talking about lifecycle management?
Yeah, and just before we dive into some of the features, I just want to give a quick overview of how to get to 9.1, right? From the vSphere perspective, we're actually enabling an upgrade path to make it very quick and simple to get onto a 9.1 version to take advantage of a lot of the VCF 9.1 capabilities. So if you're still on vSphere 8 with or without ARIA operations, or you're on vCenter 9.0 with VCF Ops 9, you can just upgrade all those components to 9.1 and start taking advantage of a lot of these features, right? This is almost like your first step forward to VCF 9.1. Get the basic stack in place, play with some of the features, and from then on, you can move forward in your cloud journey to the full VCF stack as well. So we're making it very simple to get to 9.1 from some of the vSphere bundles or the vSphere SKUs, for example.
This is something I feel like I have a conversation almost weekly about, as people get overwhelmed at the full stack and don't realize they can adopt it at the pace they need, and they can adopt it piecemeal. Like, just because you've loaded a VCF license file, it doesn't just start screaming at you, "Where is my NSX manager? I'm going to burn down your data center." Like, no, you can walk your way there. Take some time to go configure overlays, or maybe you're waiting on some drives for vSAN. You can do it as you need.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, one of the features we released in vSphere 8 and we built on it in 9.0, and we'll touch a little bit on, is ESX Live Patch. And we've taken a lot of that methodology of why are we patching the entire ESX host when only some of the code base has changed? And we're taking that approach to vCenter, right? And we're calling it vCenter Quick Patch. Rather than patch every no matter how big or how small the payload of a vCenter patch is. In the past, we actually replaced every RPM on the box. You did an in-place patch, every RPM gets replaced, gets updated, regardless of whether there was actually a code change. All the services have to stop and start. And typically an in-place patch can take anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour, maybe longer, depending on the size of the environment. Now, we did RDU, reduce downtime upgrades, to do a migration-based approach to bring that downtime, total service downtime to about 5 minutes. But vCenter Quick Patch is leveraging the in-place patching method, but we're only patching what needs to be patched, right? So if there is a critical vulnerability in the content library service, for example, we can just patch that service and just restart the content library service, and you're done. Your security patch is done, and most of your operations are going to just continue working. We don't have to restart everything. We don't have to reboot the box. We just patch one service, restart, and you're good.
Oh, so if there's something that has a non-critical patch, it would catch on the next reboot in that case, or?
Exactly. Or there might not even always need to be a full service restart regardless. And a lot of our services that are within the vCenter, because it's made up of there's 20 plus services that are actually under the hood there. VPXD being the main one that is the brains, but there's a whole load of other services that you can restart them and it doesn't interrupt productivity. So those, if there's vulnerabilities and security patches and bug fixes going into those auxiliary services, we can patch those without bringing down the entire vCenter now, which is fantastic because productivity can continue. And when we talk about the wider VCF stack, vCenter is literally the foundation of everything. If vCenter's down, a lot of things just grind to a halt, right? So we want to maintain the uptime for vCenter as much as possible, but also not disrupt customers to the ability to roll out these important patches quickly and easily.
Well, that makes sense. If all you need to do is reboot the performance service or some small piece, you don't want to break your automatic provisioning request coming in from VRA or maybe
Exactly.
Horizon or VDI or something that's got some automated process that gets very angry when the vCenter API isn't ready and listening.
Exactly. So we're expected this will, there'll be varying levels of quote unquote downtime that a quick patch may require. Depending on what's being patched, you could have absolutely zero downtime if it's a very minor auxiliary service. If it's VPXD itself needing a restart, that's going to require, 60 seconds of downtime for that to come back up. So it will vary, but it's significantly less than the traditional in-place patching method we have today.
Yes, I'll take 60 seconds over a full VM reboot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Now, this used to be an opt-in approach before, and now this is enabled by default. So everyone is automatically going to start taking advantage of this.
So it'll depend on a patch per patch basis, like ESX Live Patch. Not every patch is going to be quick patch capable, right? So it will depend on what is the patch payload. So if we have a hypothetical patch come out, after 9.1, let's say 9.1.1, that may or may not be quick patch capable. So not every patch is going to be able to take advantage of this. It will depend on the payload. The scope of quick patch, similar to ESX Live Patch, is primarily targeting those important security vulnerabilities. Removing the blocker of having to schedule downtime and maintenance windows for customers to adopt those is primarily the goal of both of these methods. Now, there's a couple of other smaller enhancements in the vCenter maintenance space as well, which, again, they're not like super interesting, but there are a lot of quality of life enhancements. First up, we are enabling the reduced downtime upgrade approach with an online depot. today this needs you to either set up an offline depot or manually download the ISO, mount it to vCenter and do it that way. If you're using the online depot mechanism, which a lot of our customers are, you don't have to fiddle with any of that. It'll automatically detect that there's a new patch or update available and offer you to do the reduced downtime upgrade method that way. You don't have to do any additional downloading or mounting or anything like that.
Nice.
Resizing vCenter is constantly being asked by the field. We've deployed it with small. We want to scale up. We need to add CPU and memory. Now that's relatively easy. You power down the VM, add the CPU, add the memory, power it back on. Where it gets tricky is with all the disks. I think vCenter has something like 12 or 15 disks attached to it for all the various services and their partitions and all that. That gets quite messy if you're trying to resize those manually, and then you have to log into the Photon layer and do auto grow and things like that. We're releasing a new API, which is essentially a single API click. You can do it from the Developer Center UI, or you can use Postman or curl or whatever you want. A one command to resize your vCenter. And you can the actually nice thing about using the API as well is you can actually defer the restart.
I was going to ask, can I wait till the next patch window?
Next patch window, or it's essentially next reboot. So
next reboot, yeah.
You can implement the API and you can use I think it's defer service restart flag, set that to true. Next restart of the vCenter, it'll automatically pick up the resize that you chose. And you don't have to look up a table of, CPU, memory, disk sizes and gigabytes and all this sort of thing. We just use the standard small, medium, large, extra large kind of t-shirt sizing in the API as well. So it makes it much, much easier to do.
Now, that's something that's always been important to me for resize operations, because inevitably you would have environments where you couldn't reboot things. And the person who was going to end up scheduling a reboot for a completely different reason was never me, the person who was wanting to do the resize operation. Or, maybe we get lucky and there was an emergency reboot window for some reason, or maybe a host failed and HA just kicked in and rebooted it for me. Like, why waste a good reboot? So having that pre-staged is nice. Now I need that I need that pre-staging for all my other VMs while I'm at it. So
yeah. And kind of on that same vein, there's another API that we can call, it's called the vCenter Maintenance Notification. This is an API that either first-party or third-party solutions can query vCenter, and if vCenter is in a maintenance state, it will return that status, rather than just saying, hey, I can't connect to vCenter or vCenter must be offline. vCenter can actually report, I'm in a maintenance state, try again in 5 minutes or whatever.
So the backup software isn't just going to keep pounding the API endpoint, getting angrier and angrier, or triggering
with no clue as to why it can't communicate.
Well, it didn't take 2 minutes, so just fail the job, give up, miss backups for tonight. Like that's smart.
Yeah. So this is something that is, it's there. You can it's in the SDK. You can adopt it for first or third party products as well. And the last little thing is something that I know customers have asked for a long, long time. We've always had to say, no, please don't do this, is upgrading the vCenter virtual hardware. We're bringing that up to hardware version 17 in VCF 9.1 from hardware version 10. This is a long thing coming. We kind of were a little bit stagnant for a while. It was a case of it's not broken, so let's not try and fix it sort of a thing. But there are new virtualization technologies that we will want to take, that vCenter will want to take advantage of in the future. So we want to get vCenter on a more recent hardware version. Now, typically it's going to be an N-1. Right now it's an N-2 or 3 just from backwards compatibility stage.
That's 7.0 if it's hardware version 17, right?
Yeah. So we're going to likely upgrade it again in another future release, but we're going to keep it on an N-1, right? Because vCenter will always need to be able to run on the previous ESX version, if that makes sense.
In case you had to downgrade for some reason, or and
vCenter is always upgraded first. So vCenter, hypothetical 10 will always be upgraded before the ESX host that it's running on.
Well, the other situation I've seen where this comes up, the hardware version, is people use an older hardware for their DR environment. Or their
Yeah.
test dev, and maybe they get to a point that hardware is really, really old and it can't run the absolute newest build, which, okay, time to budget hardware, but you don't want to be in a situation where you're trying to hit SRM and hit power on and something fails over and you can't support that hardware version you've upgraded to.
Exactly. So the upgrade of the vCenter hardware, it's automatically done for you if you're doing a major upgrade from 8 to 9 or 8 to 9.1, or if you're using the reduced downtime method going from 9 to 9.1. If you're doing an in-place patch, it will be something that you'll have to manually do. And I'll be publishing a blog article on that as well, or it may actually be published by the time you're listening to this. There is a little trick because you can schedule a VM hardware upgrade. So if you schedule the hardware upgrade for next reboot, then do the patch, you're saving yourself an extra reboot, right? So because the patch will need a reboot, the hardware upgrade needs a reboot, combine them into one maintenance window. Makes life easier.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's good.
So
come
that's
to the updates, find out the operational tips. I love this. So
that's the vCenter side of things. ESX is making improvements in the lifecycle space as well. We'll talk about what we're calling zero-touch provisioning or vSphere elastic provisioning in a moment. But vSphere Lifecycle Manager has some nice quality of life enhancements too. We're doing an image checksum. So this is so that when you're exporting an image definition from one vCenter to another vCenter, for example, you can be sure that the definition is what you expect it to be. It'll be a SHA-256 checksum just to make sure that you have the integrity of the image on the destination as well. It's not a checksum of the VIBs itself. It's just a checksum of the image definition. And we've spoken, I think, on this podcast before about HSM. And John, you're probably familiar with the HSM and doing the firmware and driver checks with vSAN. We're actually doing some of those basic firmware driver checks without a HSM. So if you do have a vSAN cluster, you're running 9.1 and you don't have a HSM, we will do, let's say, a first level of validation. We will check what is the firmware and driver that you're currently running and check that against the HCL. We won't, however, be able to patch that firmware or offer you any newer drivers, for example. But it's a first level validation of what you're currently running to make sure that is certified, essentially.
This one is weirdly exciting to me because it's very often that you're just trying to get a cluster online and build stuff on top of it, and you're going to deploy the HSM on top of it. And so sometimes your initial firmware level, you might just be pushing through out-of-bands direct or things. At least understand the scope of how far out you're at, or make people aware they need to go deploy the HSM. A fun detail I actually found out, I talked to one of the engineers who was working on this, and what he was saying is they're actually changing the mechanism that we check firmware and driver, because vSAN's checked firmware and drivers of some components for a while. They're actually going to move to an in-band using, I believe, the inbox drivers. And so it actually should be longer term, more stable and consistent, because sometimes the out of band, the mechanism that we would pull firmware before not using the drivers, you could sometimes numbers would get cut off. You'd occasionally get false flags on things being not correct. So it should be a better, more unified approach going forward. We're going to push stuff too. So.
And this is handy for test dev or for home labs where you don't want to have that ugly yellow warning saying firmware and driver not checked, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. This will actually give you just a little bit of a cleaner UI as well.
I used to always get so jealous of vCenter updates that would just automatically be available within the interface, and then you can just check for updates. Oh, here they are. We can apply these. But every time I was updating firmware using my HSM, it was very manual. Getting the HSM to work initially used to be a pain, and then obviously getting the actual drivers that I wanted, the firmware drivers, used to be such a manual process. Is that no longer the case? It's been a while since I've actually tried to upgrade a server, a couple of years now, but has that changed over the years?
It should be simpler. It should be simpler for a couple of reasons. That the integration between the HSM and vSphere Lifecycle Manager is always getting better. And we do what do we call them? The recommended images as well. vSphere Lifecycle Manager can check, hey, there's a new version of ESX out, and it will double check, is that going to be okay with your current firmware driver combination? Is there a newer firmware driver combination available to you? Is that going to be okay for vSAN? So it does have all those kind of validations, automated validations in there. I think they're since a 8 U1, U2 sort of time frame. I think we really did a lot of work there as well.
I will say this is still an area that it's definitely gotten better, but I would encourage everyone to go talk to your OEMs and look at other OEMs plural, because some of them would kind of make you go build your own image. Some of them have it to where they have a recommended package you can go download. And then some of them actually have built into their plugin that they sideload into vCenter. They have literally a button that just goes and grabs it from the repository and auto loads it. So this is a case where our partners differentiate on their implementations. And I'd encourage you to ask for a demo and go look at that. Because some of them, it's just going to be an easy click and you never have to leave vCenter. Some of them, they make you do some work.
Yeah, it definitely depends on the OEM. Once you're in vCenter, once everything is hooked up, the workflow is pretty much the same regardless of the vendor, but getting to that stage can be different levels of hurdles. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is what we're calling zero-touch provisioning, and it's kind of as part of what you might hear as vSphere elastic provisioning, right? This is essentially auto-deploy's next evolution, right? It's network booting an ESXi host so that it's ready to go, ready to use, configured, part of vCenter, ready for VCF, all that sort of stuff. Where this differs from auto-deploy in 9.1 is it supports TPMs, it supports secure boot, and it uses HTTPS boot protocols. And it doesn't require a TFTP, which was just an annoying little thing that auto-deploy just depended on. We had to do this kind of double jump or double hop before the server spoke to vCenter. In this method,
I think you got to be careful, because if we say TFTP 3 times, plinkers will show up and remind us that it's the least secure protocol ever invented. Authentication? No authentication. You want to delete a file? You want to get a file? Whatever. You do you.
So this method is actually, again, this will depend slightly different depending on your OEM and depending on your UEFI. So you can either just configure the server UEFI to go, here's vCenter's URL, go talk, here's a static IP. Once you boot, go talk to vCenter. Or if you can't define a static IP at the UEFI level, you can use DHCP to get an IP and then talk to vCenter. But once you talk to vCenter, you're pulling down the image, the cluster, the configuration. Very similar to auto-deploy. Once the host boots, a lot of what's happening is going to be very similar to anyone who's been doing auto-deploy. And the host will join vCenter. Where this also differs slightly from auto-deploy is that it doesn't use host profiles. It will only use vSphere configuration profiles for that desired state methodology. Host profiles are deprecated anyway since 9.0. So, we don't want to really be leveraging them anymore. But you'll see this feature, or this vSphere elastic provisioning feature get built on in subsequent releases as well. So keep an eye out on this one. Right now, it's great for the edge. If you don't want to have to send somebody out to install ESX hosts in a remote data center or an edge site, all you need is network connectivity. You can boot them, join vCenter, do the rest all remotely. So that's one of the big use cases for this as well is edge deployments. But it can be used for
that's a huge one, yeah.
Massive scale deployments as well.
One thing to remember if you're doing that kind of drop ship, just have someone do the blind rack and stack and bring that up. I believe most OEMs, if you're ordering from them, they will give you the MAC addresses of the servers as part of the sales BOM. And so that way, when you're building out which server went where, and you can figure that out, because you're going to be conveniently sitting back in your nice office, not at some, lumber site in the middle of West Virginia woods or something, racking and stacking. You can remotely go look at what's plugged into what port and look at what they sold you, those MAC addresses, and set your DHCP reservations accordingly, and go through and set your profiles for each server. So that way you can enumerate them correctly and understand where everything's plugged in. Also
Exactly.
remember VM kernel 0 comes up as the first NIC's MAC address. It does not use a VMware identified MAC. And so that's the other way you can find those hosts.
And the good thing about knowing what the MACs are as well, and it doesn't have to be the MAC address, but you can define the zero-touch provisioning deployment rules based on things like the MAC address or the serial number or vendor string, different things to determine what batch of hosts get what image, get what config, join what cluster. Again, very similar to auto-deploy's deployment rules as well. I mentioned ESX live patch as well. There's not a huge amount in ESX live patch that's net new in 9.1, other than TPM support, which I suppose is big enough because that was a very large blocker for customers to be able to leverage live patch, right? It didn't work when you had TPM devices enabled on your servers. If customers wanted to disable or wanted to use live patch, they had to disable TPM, but to disable TPM, you have to bring down the server. So it was kind of a catch-22. Do you incur downtime to give yourself the opportunity to not have downtime in the future? We've removed all that problem in 9.1. TPM servers are fully supported. There's some expanded code coverage as well in ESX. A lot of the vSAN daemons, for example, some core storage daemons, user world daemons. We've really expanded how much of ESX now is live patch capable. But I will still preface it by saying our scope is still for security patches, right? Don't expect every ESX patch to be live patch capable. I would love that. I'm sure our PMs would love that. Everybody would love that. That's not the goal right now. The goal is still for the security patches to be the first priority for live patch.
What about vSAN?
Yeah, vSAN supports it. Okay, vSAN can support live patch as well. Config profiles is, it's our latest way of doing configuration at scale across multiple clusters, multiple vCenters. Again, this was first introduced in 8.0, and we've been expanding and adding interoperability in current releases. vSAN is the big one in 9.1. vSAN integration in your config profile. You can still use the vSAN tab in the vSphere client, or you can if you have that kind of standard configuration known, you can programmatically put that into your config profile and copy that configuration then to multiple clusters very easily or multiple vCenters very easily. Memory tiering is configured using config profiles as well, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the hardware acceleration section. And it interoperates with the zero-touch provisioning that we spoke about as well. So it's, again, the concept of configuration profiles isn't new in 9.1. We're just adding, again, a lot of quality of life and interoperability features to this desired state technology.
I'll definitely take that over having to SSH into every single host and go create a partition for memory tiering. So, it's a valuable feature, but yeah, the initial setup was a bit much. So having that programmatically deployed across the cluster is going to be great.
Now, certificates, Bob, if you have Bob on, he'll probably talk, a lot more on certificates and certificate management. This one is kind of near and dear to my heart because I came from the support background where expired certificates, especially around the 5.5, 6.0 timeframe, it was keeping me in a job essentially. the amount of issues that we used to be having. We've done a lot of work in 9.0 and 9.1 to remove defunct certificates, things like deprecating the solution users and the solution user certificates, but introducing these auto-renew values. Now, we have auto-renew for certificates and certificate management in VCF Ops, and that's where you should be doing that if you're doing it at scale. But if you do have smaller environments, smaller test dev environments, we have these nice little enhancements here. ESX certificates will automatically renew if they're 30 days prior to expiration. vCenter certificates will do the same. I believe I need to double check, but I think it's either 5 days or 10 days prior to expiration for that. And VMCA as well will automatically renew on an upgrade if we determine that it's approaching its expiry as well, because expired certificates during and or after an upgrade are one of the largest SR drivers as well. So we're just fixing problems here before they ever happen. Now, this will only actually take place on default VMCA issued. If you're running your own custom CA certificates, we're not going to touch those.
You might find this interesting, Feidhlim. John and I were at a VMUG recently, a VMUG Connect event, and we spoke to somebody that's currently in support, and that was one of the questions we asked. We're like, "Oh, what is the most common thing that you work with customers?" And certificate management was it was always the case. It was for previous versions, obviously not 9.1, but like for folks that are in previous versions, this just seems to be one of the biggest support issues still.
Yeah, so it is good that we're still investing in fixing these problems and making the product itself smarter so that these issues just don't happen again. So it's good to see. And there's some, again, it's not super sexy stuff to talk about, but there's actually some nice little vCenter performance improvements in 9.1 as well. We're in our own internal testing, we are seeing up to 25% increase in vCenter operations. And this is operations like reconfiguring virtual machines, changing settings on a host. It doesn't increase the performance of your workloads themselves, but vCenter operations, things that vCenter is doing in the environment, creating objects, deleting objects, we're seeing those operations and those API calls much faster in 9.1. And one large thing that, John, you mentioned backups a while ago, the backup vendor just spinning its wheels. We're seeing a large increase in the simultaneous backup operations as well. And there's safeguards now in place so that if a particular rogue backup operation is consuming all these sessions, for example, and that has the potential to bring down vCenter, we now have safeguards in place and alarms to actually stop that from happening. So again, they're not super, you're not going to see these on the front page of the marketing collateral, but these are things that I'm sure a lot of our listeners have encountered in their time and will welcome these changes as well.
The scale on some of the backup simultaneous operations, I was like, well, how would you open enough? I'm like, oh, people really are trying to kick off 2,000 concurrent backup jobs at the same time against a vCenter. I was looking at that, and first I was thinking to myself, you probably would actually get better backup throughput if you limited yourself to one or two jobs per host, not trying to go nuts here. But yeah, it does look like some people really try to push the limits there, and making sure that doesn't saturate out the vCenter entirely of connections and have it start dropping is a good thing.
Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of the best bits of Lifecycle. There's obviously a lot more, and I'd urge listeners to have a look at the release notes, have a look at the documentation, keep an eye out on blogs off VMware.com for more as well, deep dives into all these features.
Yeah, I was going to say we will definitely leave a link to the blogs that have been released these past couple of weeks since the launch, including yours, Feidhlim. So we'll be sure to have all of those in the show notes of this podcast. But yeah, why don't we move over now that we've talked a lot about lifecycle management? Let's transition over to VM management.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things we're doing here in the vMotion space, and sometimes it surprises me how much we're still investing in kind of staple technologies that we take for granted, like vMotion and DRS, right? They've been around for decades now at this stage. And one thing that we're introducing in 9.1 is DRS optimized maintenance mode, right? Today, if you put a host into a maintenance mode, it will just start evacuating without prejudice. It will just empty all of its VMs into the other hosts in the cluster. And that might be fine. DRS will go and rebalance those if there's contention after the fact as well. But what we're introducing in 9.1, the UI will say non-disruptive vMotion evacuation. I'm not a huge fan of that wording because it kind of implies that there is disruption if you're doing a standard vMotion. But I'll explain what that means, and it'll hopefully make a little bit more sense. So if we've got a VM, let's say we have one VM on a host that has a reservation, it's quite important. We don't want it to start swapping or having any sort of resource contention. And we need to put the host that it's running on into maintenance mode. We can use this non-disruptive vMotion evacuation setting. And what it will do, it won't immediately evacuate the host and move that VM. It will first check the rest of the cluster and see, do I have space to move this VM in a way that will not result in any contention, right? So it will actually reach out to the other hosts in the cluster first. It might do a little bit of a rebalance there before the host actually enters maintenance mode. So that's a behavioral change. Before, it was the other way around. We would just blindly evacuate the host and rebalance after. Now we're doing a rebalance before we evacuate the host to make sure that the VMs being evacuated don't suffer any resource contention.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. So before it was basically, well, I'll just see where everything is and then choose where I want to go and then fix things in post, if you will. Whereas now
Exactly.
It's like doing the cleanup up front to make room for the place. That actually makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, and both options are there, obviously. But yeah, if you do have particular VMs that you only want them to be evacuated, or you only want that host to enter maintenance mode without impacting the current compute demand for those VMs, we now have that ability.
A kinder, gentler evacuation. So yeah, don't be scared of the language, people. The regular mode is not going to just arbitrarily stun everything.
Yeah, it's not disruptive either. So the other thing that we're doing, and this plays into some of this DRS evacuation of hosts, is right now today, if I think 8 is the default maximum number of concurrent vMotion tasks that we do. And what we're doing in 9.1 is, let me step back again. 8 is the maximum number of concurrent vMotion tasks that we do today. And what actually happened is, if we were doing a batch of 8 and then we were doing another batch of 8, we would actually wait until all the first batch are done before we would actually start the second batch. And that just seems, inefficient. You could have one vMotion task finish in 2 seconds, the 8th one finish in 60 seconds, and you've got all this time between where we can actually utilize. So in 9.1, as soon as one vMotion task completes, it essentially opens up a slot for another migration to begin. So it's more efficient use of time and resources, and an overall improved throughput. So this is, again, for large-scale vMotion tasks. Typically, that's that inter-maintenance mode evacuation sort of a use case where we're no longer waiting for all 8 to complete before we do the next batch.
Yeah, that's just more efficient code.
So, no, this is obviously a lot better. That 8, just to be clear, is that a per host or per cluster?
I think that's the per host default slot, and this is tweakable. Those vMotion, there's an algorithm. It depends on the host, the data store, things like that, of how many are the maximum concurrent vMotions. But kind of out of the box, default kind of scenario, I believe, is 8, but it's tweakable.
Got it.
Yeah, and for those that are listening to this podcast, jump onto the VCF YouTube channel, because you're sharing some good content, and the visual really supports what you're saying, makes it look a little bit more understandable. Yeah, that's actually really good. That visual really lights it up for me.
Yeah,
and there will be blogs.
Yes. Okay. So let me jump to workload acceleration now, just in the interest of time here, because there's a lot here that is interesting and very kind of topical, I should say. And the first one is memory tiering. We released memory tiering in 9.0 before there was a DRAM shortage. So we got ahead of the problem, which was good for us. With memory tiering, if for anyone that doesn't know, is it allows us to use NVMe devices as a second tier of memory, right? You've got your DRAM, which is your first tier or your tier 0. That's where all your hot pages are going to reside. And for cold pages, rather than taking up space in that valuable DRAM, we're now able to ship those to the NVMe device. So this is, it's becoming one of our most talked about and most asked about features ever since we released it in 9.0. And it's only more topical now because of the DRAM shortage. People are trying to squeeze as much out of their existing hardware as they can. And by using memory tiering, they can get additional bang for their buck. You can add that tier of memory using NVMe devices and get better consolidation out of their servers without having to wait for DRAM.
So for anyone who was using VCF 9.0 and was experimenting with the memory tiering, how does that look different for 9.1?
So the user, I suppose the user workflow is pretty similar. John mentioned there were some CLI options that you had to go to every individual host to claim the NVMe disks. You don't have to do that anymore. You can do that through the UI now with config profiles, vSphere config profiles. Very easy. It actually brings up, you don't have to know the UUID of the disk. We'll present you the disks. You can select which one. It's very straightforward. You were able to use hardware RAID in 9.0, but not every servers have hardware RAID, or you don't have the right controllers, especially if you're using vSAN. Maybe you want the RAID there. So we can do software mirroring in 9.1 as well. And there's no special hardware needed. It's built into ESX to do that software mirroring from your primary NVMe device to the secondary NVMe device. And sorry, John?
Yeah, I was going to say, I know initially people were coming out saying, hey, I want redundancy. I don't want to have an HA event, which is frankly all that actually happened if you had a dry fill. It didn't crash the host. It just rebooted the VMs. But
yeah,
people were worried about that. And the challenge there of using hardware RAID is if you're going to use a host ever for vSAN, you want NVMe direct. You don't want a RAID controller. And how most of the server vendors cable their hosts is if you put a RAID controller in there, they're going to wire all the drive bays to it. And so you kind of lock yourself down that path. Also, that RAID controller, there's a finite number of PCIe channels. NVMe drives actually perform better direct to a point. So having that software option, and I saw that having that within the configuration option, as well as just being able to check a box and do the encryption, looks rather nice.
Yeah, and in the interoperability space, that the bubble here refers to, there's certain workload types or certain VM types, high latency sensitive VMs, fault tolerant VMs, kind of nested hypervisor VMs, and that's really kind of Microsoft VBS, where you turn on Hyper-V as well for those VMs. Those VMs they don't interoperate with memory tiering, and we still don't support them with memory tiering. But what we do support now is memory tiering can be on for that host, and those types of VMs will automatically be excluded. You had to do some manual tweaking, either disable memory tiering on those VM objects themselves or disable it on the host. We now have some intelligence built in so that we can identify what is the type of VM, and we will work accordingly. And in the performance improvements here is that in 9.1, we're seeing better performance in our memory tiering technology versus 9.0. This doesn't mean that your VMs are going to automatically perform better when they're using memory tiering. This is just highlighting that we have actually seen some performance gains if we're comparing something running on memory with memory tiering in 9.0 to running with memory tiering in 9.1.
Okay. Now the observability on that real quick. So I know that I think I saw some demos of the ability to, before you actually apply the memory tiering, to actually see what it's going to do and how much, how much performance you can actually gain. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, I don't believe that's in the vSphere UI. That's going to be in VCF Ops. where you can almost do a prediction type of a thing, or a what if I add this amount of memory tiering, what are the expected allocation gates. Yeah, there is some basic observability in the vSphere client, but it's very rudimentary. It's very basic. Just how much of the DRAM am I using? How much of the NVMe device am I using?
Got it.
So Pete, I posted it to you on chat, and you can inject it in there later if you want. But the ops dashboard, it's going to show you your current active memory, your CPU utilization, potential savings based off of some modeling of math that I'm sure unfortunately changes daily with the price of RAM. But it'll show you basically your current scenario and then what it'll look like with or without memory tiering, and what type of density you could get on a cluster if you turned it on.
Yeah, that's pretty slick, actually. I think people are going to really like that.
Yeah. Now, this slide or this graphic, if we put this on screen, this is just the diagram of the memory tiering, the software mirroring that we spoke about. Again, it's built into ESX. You don't have to do any tweaking. There's no configuration other than choosing your two NVMe devices during the initial config, or you can add an additional one later if you don't do it up front. There's no additional work or tweaks that you have to do as the administrator or the user. It's built into ESX to automatically do that tiering. And another thing in vMotion, again, vMotion has been around for decades, and encrypted vMotion has been around for a long time as well. Somewhere in the vSphere 6 days, I want to say, that we introduced vMotion encryption. And while I don't think it's a default on yet, still it's opportunistic, which typically means most servers today or most users today, you're actually doing encrypted vMotion, and you just don't know it because it just happens under the hood automatically. What we're doing in 9.1 is we're leveraging Intel QAT, or Quick Assist technology, to offload the encryption and the decryption from the CPU cores to the Intel QAT chiplet, essentially. So this should make your encrypted vMotions a little bit quicker. It'll free up a little bit of CPU cycle as well, and just to have overall better host consolidation. So again, this is something that will automatically just work. You don't have to opt into anything if you're using encrypted vMotion. If your CPUs are, I believe, Sapphire Rapids or later, they should have Intel QAT technology, and we'll all just automatically start using it.
Oh, okay. So as long as you got a CPU that actually supports it, then it's just going to work.
Yep. Nothing else you need to do. And the last thing I'm going to talk about here is the scheduler. The ESX scheduler, obviously we're all biased. It is the best virtual machine scheduler out there, but it could be better. And so we've made it better. And this is really to take advantage of the high density CPUs that we have today. CPUs with just crazy amount of cores. The existing scheduler still works, remarkably well for these high density CPUs, but we've revamped our scheduler, made it more, we call it topology aware scheduler, to really take advantage of those modern CPUs. There's better NUMA placement decisions as well. We're not only taking into account the CPU contention, we're taking into account cache and memory bandwidth contention as well. This, again, is something that you don't really see. It's all happening under the hood on the ESX scheduler, but it is something that customers should see benefits happening once they move to 9.1, especially for those super dense ESX hosts as well, with massive number of cores.
This really kind of gets me on one of my pet peeves I've had lately, where I swear I'm going to throw my SATA doc at the next person who says hypervisors are a commodity or pretends like there's been no innovation in scheduling in the last 20 years. Every new generation that AMD and Intel ship, we have to go improve things, fix things, accommodate for things, support new offload functions. And what's been really interesting, I really noticed it with Granite Rapids. What used to be was one CPU generation, everything was kind of the same. You actually have situations where, depending on which SKU you buy, you're either getting one chiplet or as many as 3 chiplets on the same socket. So that one socket server is really acting like a 3-way server. And if you have a 2-socket server, it's really acting like a 6-way server. And if you think back to like everything that we learned about how a quad socket box was not twice as fast as a 2-socket box, there was extra latency penalties between and more NUMA consideration. Those problems have actually or not problems, but those engineering challenges have manifested themselves even down to a single socket now. And these are the things that we have to account for. Not only for your workloads, but also our own internal processes, things like vSAN, where we obviously use more than one thread. So we have to be intelligent about where we place our threads. This is compounded quite a bit. So, and this is something that I've been really happy talking to the engineering teams on and seeing the proof in the pudding on, especially on those larger VMs and really anything that's going to use a lot of threads, making sure that's as efficient as possible. Rant over, Pete.
Nice. Well, man, that is a lot. I know there's even more, and as I mentioned, I will be leaving links in the show notes of the podcast of all the blogs, all the announcements. Great stuff. I mean, I know there's been a ton of additions to even in the AI space with support for AMD, both GPU and CPU. Like so many new things that are coming out for this event. This is for a .1, man. This is actually a pretty substantial release. Feidhlim, I'll ask you this question, but first I'll ask John. Of all the updates in vSphere, John, what is your favorite? Which one do you think that customers are going to appreciate the most?
Which one do I think they're going to appreciate the most?
Just your personal opinion.
I think it's the little things. It's the making it to where like memory tiering that I can click some buttons and I don't have to go SSH into host. It's it's going to be at 3, that vCenter, the getting upgraded and patched without disruption. That's going to keep me from having to schedule a maintenance window that impacts my dinner time with my children. Like it's the little things that save you time and keep you from having to do operations at weird hours that I think just improve quality of life. I mean, yeah, sure, business outcomes, but dinner with my kids is frankly more important to me. And those anything that's reducing that Gantt chart of stuff that anybody who's in operations has to deal with, I think is fundamentally going to bring them joy.
I like it. Feidhlim, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I would agree with John. I think last time I was on, I said memory tiering was the most interesting thing. But I would probably, if I had to pick one, I would say the vCenter quick patch. Again, being able to just literally patch vCenter before you've actually gone and gotten that coffee is remarkable to me. The fact that it used to take up to an hour or more, and now it can be done in sometimes seconds. Feidhlim of 10 years ago when he was working in GS wouldn't have believed that was ever going to be a thing.
Well,
I agree.
And it's not just that it's that many seconds versus that many minutes or that hour. It's that's short enough that the cab isn't going to debate me for 2 months over whether they'll approve that change. That's what I hope we get to. Is these upgrade operations and these day 2 ops are so smooth and so seamless. We don't have to add that longer Gantt chart to that operation. It's like DRS. Like you don't approve every vMotion. It's just on. You don't think about it. And I want to get there with Lifecycle.
I love that. Feidhlim, as always, thanks so much for joining us on Virtually Speaking. If you're listening to this, jump onto the VCF YouTube channel to see the full video and check the show notes for all of the latest blogs on VCF 9.1, specifically vSphere. So again, Feidhlim, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.